Meanwhile, Time magazine naming Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy its 2022 Person of the Year for his ability to galvanize the world against the invasion of Ukraine. And 10 months in, still galvanizing, President Biden asking Congress to send Kiev, listen for it, another $37 billion in aid. Just last month. Today, Russian President Vladimir Putin told reporters he expects the war to be a long process. So will Zelensky be Time's Person of the Year next year and for the next decade? Joining me now to discuss, Fox News contributor and retired Marine Corps Sergeant Joey Jones. Welcome back, Joey.
Well, good evening. Yeah, Person of the Year. That's weren't we all Person of the Year maybe a decade and a half ago? I miss those days when places like Time magazine understood maybe the contribution of, I don't know, the American taxpayer. I mean, I think if anybody really deserves credit for Ukraine still being around, it's either the Ukrainians that have fought or the Americans that have paid for it. But this is not surprising, and I'm not offended by it. I'm not upset by it because I understand the entertainment cabal that exists, and nobody has had the PR campaign that Zelensky's had. And I don't know the guy. Maybe he's genuine, but there's a Vogue shoot that a lot of people probably on his side wish hadn't happened. Yes, and there was the comparison to the Holocaust that many people were offended by. So, what is your biggest fear here? That we're propping Ukraine up just enough so they can have their own forever war that's going to go on, 10, 15 more years? Or that the perceived good guys won't stay good guys forever now that they are flush with weapon systems and cash? Yeah, it's all the above. I mean, listen, before this happened, there was a lot of skepticism of Zelensky's government in Ukraine. And I don't think that skepticism should go away because Vladimir Putin is a proven bad actor and his invasion of Ukraine is a proven bad thing. Any administration would be in a tough spot once this happened. The pressure from within and without to aid Ukraine is one thing. The pressure to do it in a way that doesn't provide weapons to our enemies or embellish the pro-American stance of a country being invaded. All of the questions that people that are now looked at as outliers, conspiracy theorists, or what have you, the Rand Pauls of the world that are isolationists, all their questions are completely valid. There are people in the military that are incredibly concerned with where some of the weapons ended up and the hands they ended up in and who's going to know what our arsenal looks like from the inside out now. Those are all valid. Our government does a great job at spending money. Unfortunately, they're not good at much else. So when we arm the Ukrainians, which is a great thing in sound and verbally, but the practical application of it has been anything but logistically sound, and that's a concern. On top of that, if you're just going to name a Person of the Year, I see why it's Zelensky. I do. How about Elon Musk? Whether you love him or hate him, who's changed the world more in the last 10 years than probably he has? I mean, he was a part of Ukraine. He provided Starlink to Ukraine when they had their war. He just bought Twitter, the world's probably preeminent, at least in the ruling class, communication platform. And then if you want to go down from there, I mean, Pete Davidson's probably going to be responsible for a lot of art that influences our culture with all of his ex-girlfriends. And if you want to be serious about it, what about Ennis Freedom, who stood up to China and probably the most powerful sports media conglomerate called the NBA in the world, and just spoke the truth and gave up his family and his job to do it?
Yes, and he knew what he was up against. That is an incredibly brave person, doing something that LeBron James would never have the nards to do. I've known Ennis for a few years, and I'm so incredibly proud of the way he has stood up against tyranny and authoritarianism, not just in his native Turkey, but also the Chinese Communist Party and even some of the buffoons here in the United States that you pointed out. I would like to see Iranian women shouted out as Women of the Year. Talk about people who are really, truly risking their lives, and they're doing it every day, taking to the streets. And they know it is tantamount to a death sentence, what they are doing. And I think that they deserve some recognition.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe Time magazine labeled them Hero of the Year. So I applaud them for that. I'm a fair person. And it's not just about, dragging out the rag of Time magazine or anything like that. I think that's amazing. But we talk about Person of the Year. We don't talk about Hero of the Year. That's a consolation prize. They don't publicize it the same way. And I think maybe if they had the chance to reverse those two, I think a lot of people would be happier with it.
Nancy Kerrigan also got the silver medal. Joey Jones, thanks.
Yeah,
I always love talking to you. Thank you, dear.